The first sound Victor Langford heard that morning wasn't the shuffle of reporters or the echo of footsteps against marble floors. It was the clicking of camera shutters, rapid, hungry, predatory. The kind of sound that followed kings when they walked through cities they believed they owned. Victor paused just outside the courtroom doors and adjusted his cufflinks, platinum set with tiny diamonds that caught the fluorescent lights. He checked his reflection in the polished brass frame beside him. Dark sunglasses, tailored navy suit, a silk tie the color of midnight. He looked immaculate, untouchable. He smiled faintly to himself. Inside the courtroom, more than 40 families sat quietly in the back rows. Some clutched folded tissues, some stared at the floor, a few looked straight ahead with hollow, exhausted expressions. They had lost their homes, apartment complexes purchased through one of Victor's shell companies and emptied within weeks under questionable legal filings. Evictions stamped with authority but soaked in manipulation. To Victor, they were numbers on a spreadsheet. Loss mitigation, asset repositioning. To them, he was the reason their children had slept in cars. The double doors opened. He stepped inside like a man entering a gala instead of a court of law. Reporters leaned forward, whispered his name. Victor Langford, the billionaire real estate titan, founder of Langford Urban Holdings, a man who had reshaped entire neighborhoods with steel and glass and left little room for those who couldn't afford the view. He didn't glance at the families, didn't nod at his attorneys. He walked straight to the defense table, pulled out a chair slowly, deliberately, and sat down as if he were lowering himself onto a throne. Then he did something small, insultingly small. He propped his polished shoes onto the edge of the defense table. A murmur rolled through the room like distant thunder. He leaned back in the chair, crossed one ankle over the other, and scrolled through his phone. A notification flashed, market opening numbers. His company stock had dipped 3 points overnight. He smirked. Temporary. Everything was temporary when you had enough money. The bailiff cleared his throat loudly. All rise. The Superior Court of New York is now in session. The Honorable Judge Alana Whitaker presiding. Chairs scraped across the floor. Bodies stood. Even the reporters rose in respect. Victor did not move. He didn't even look up. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Alana Whitaker entered with steady composure. She wore black robes that fell in clean lines, her silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself like someone who had never needed height to command a room. She had presided over corruption trials, gang indictments, corporate fraud, murder cases that made headlines for months. She had seen power abused in every form imaginable. But this was theater. Her gaze moved across the room, taking everything in at once. The families, the reporters, the attorneys. Then her eyes landed on Victor's shoes. She paused. Then she sat. "Mr. Langford," she said calmly, her voice smooth but edged with steel. "This is a courtroom. Remove your feet from the table and stand when the court commands." Victor slowly lowered his sunglasses to the bridge of his nose and looked at her over the top of the frames. His lips curled. "Ma'am," he said, loudly enough for the back row to hear, "I don't stand for anyone who doesn't work for me." The words hung in the air, a collective inhale. Even his own attorney stiffened. The bailiff took a cautious step forward. "Sir." Victor waved him off without looking. "I said what I said." He leaned forward slightly now, resting his elbows on the chair arms. "I'm Victor Langford," he continued. "I fund half the redevelopment in this city. There are people in this room whose salaries exist because of me." He tapped his phone against his palm. "You want respect? Send me an invoice." Someone in the back gasped. Judge Whitaker did not react immediately. She folded her hands neatly on the bench and studied him as one might study a puzzle piece that clearly didn't belong. "Mr. Langford," she said evenly, "this is not your boardroom. It is not your investment conference. It is not a shareholders' meeting. It is a court of law." He scoffed. "You are required to follow basic procedure," she continued. "Failure to do so places you in contempt." Victor leaned back again, folding his arms. "Go ahead," he said. "You think I'm afraid of a robe?" "This audit," she continued, has uncovered extensive financial fraud, including falsified earnings reports, misappropriation of investor funds, and laundering of revenue through overseas subsidiaries. A low, stunned murmur filled the courtroom. Victor shook his head. "That's not proven," he said quickly. "You can't prove that." Judge Whitaker lifted another document, signed, stamped, official. "This," she said, "is an arrest warrant issued by the United States Attorney's Office." The words struck like a physical blow. Victor staggered back slightly. "No," he breathed. "That's impossible." "It isn't." The bailiffs tightened their grip on his arms. "You will not be leaving this building as a free man," Judge Whitaker finished. The room seemed to tilt for him, the edges blurred. The steady confidence that had carried him through hostile takeovers, regulatory fines, and political scandals evaporated like smoke. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "I built this city." "You exploited it," Judge Whitaker corrected. They began to lower him to his knees to secure the cuffs. "I'm Victor Langford," he said again, but now it sounded less like a declaration and more like a plea. "No one is untouchable," Judge Whitaker replied. "Not here." The metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. For the first time in his adult life, Victor felt something cold that had nothing to do with steel. Fear. As they pulled him toward the exit, he glanced at the families in the back row. A little girl was sitting beside her mother, clutching a stuffed bear. She watched him silently. He remembered suddenly something he hadn't thought about in decades. His own childhood apartment, the eviction notice taped to the door, his mother crying quietly at the kitchen table. He had sworn then that he would never be powerless again. He had kept that promise at the cost of becoming the very thing he once hated. The courtroom doors opened. Cameras flashed like lightning as he was led out, not as a titan of industry, but as a defendant in cuffs. Judge Whitaker returned to her seat. She lifted the gavel and brought it down once. "Let the record reflect," she said, her voice steady and unshaken, "that respect is earned by conduct, not purchased by wealth." Applause broke out, soft at first, then louder, not triumphant, not vengeful, just relieved, because for once in a world that often bent toward money and power, something had held firm. And as Victor Langford was escorted down the courthouse steps, stripped of control, stripped of illusion, he finally understood a truth he had never accounted for in any balance sheet. Power without accountability is temporary, but consequences are inevitable.